Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions webinar on Chapter 2, the Literature Review. Just a couple things before we get started. I just want to make sure you kind of know who we are. Statistics Solutions, we're a full-service dissertation consulting company. We offer assistance with all the chapters of the dissertation, with methods, statistics, qualitative methods, as well as statistics and quantitative. And also, defense PowerPoints. So we have a wide range of services. And I would encourage you, if you like what you hear after this the webinar, go to our website and look around. We have resources. We have this webinar and other webinars archived on the website. Resources, and there you can kind of look where you can sign up for consultation, which is free, and you can talk to somebody who will give you more details than I can about the services we offer, and if that's right for you. And again, at the end, I'm going to give you more of the contact information, and it will be on the slides as well that you get. We have a co-host on who has just put up some links to our website, to some of those resources and the webinars that are archived that I just mentioned. So those are there in the chat box. Also, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to type them into the question and answer box. It's just that I won't get to them until the end. We'll have a question and answer session at the end. All right, great. So let's get started on the chapter 2. Our kind of guide or model for the dissertation is pretty standard. It follows a standard 5-chapter model. There are different models, but the 5-chapter model is pretty standard, where the chapter 1 is the introduction, the chapter 2 is the literature review, the chapter 3 is the methods, the chapter 4 is where you present your results, and the chapter 5 is where you discuss your results. So let's just pull back for a minute and look at the purpose, talk a little bit about the purpose of the lit review, the chapter 2, before we, start getting into what's actually in it. Now, it is, the whole dissertation is challenging, okay? But the chapter 2 is one of the more challenging chapters, and that is because, number one, it's usually long, and number 2, you're dealing with a lot of information, right? You're supposed to give a comprehensive review of the research on your topic. And that can encompass a lot of research, that can be, 40, 50 sources or more. So that's a lot of information that you have to, basically the challenge for the chapter 2 is organization, one of the challenges, because you have a lot of material, and to organize and to structure that material in a way that, is reader friendly, that makes sense, that, ideas flow together and it makes a coherent argument. It's a challenging chapter. I talked about the length. Get your school's template if you haven't already obtained it. That will tell you any kind of specifics that your school wants as far as length, as far as what's required. Now there are a lot of commonalities, and our what we're going to talk about today is pretty standard. But you always want to adhere to your school's template, because if there's any kind of differences, you're going to know it by looking at the template, and what specifically they want. But I've seen lit reviews 10 pages long. I've seen lit reviews 80 pages long, but the sweet spot seems to be about 30 pages. So it's kind of one of the longer chapters. And the purpose of the lit review, it's not just to kind of, to review the literature, to give your study some context. It does do that, but it culminates in a larger argument for your research problem, right? There's a reason why you're conducting your study, right? There's a research problem. There's something you're getting at that you want to address. You're getting information on something that hasn't been done before, that's unique, right? So, and the lit review helps make that case, right? Here's the literature that's been conducted on the topic. Here's how people have approached it. And ultimately, they haven't done what you're going to do. That's why your study is needed. That's the kind of niche that your study is filling. And so the lit review also serves that purpose. It shows what has been done in the research to highlight then what has not been done and what you're going to do. So that just kind of pulling back in a larger sense, that's the purpose of the lit review. Okay, so let's get into what it actually contains. So these are the sections we'll be covering today. As you can see, there's not very many because where things really get unique is in the review of the literature section. That's where everything is going to be, or the literature you're reviewing is going to be specific to your study, right? So they're all going to be different, right? So let's get to the introduction. All right, so the introduction, just like introductions to other chapters, the introduction basically just reorients the reader, right? So a good way to do that is to start off by restating the purpose of your study. Remind the reader of the importance and the need for your study. That's going to sound kind of like the research problem. If you want, you can preview contents of the chapter. So it's not a long section, probably less than a page, maybe a page at the most, a couple paragraphs. Again, it's just to kind of reorient the reader about what you're doing and why, right? Reminding them of the need for your study. And again, if your template says something else, follow your template. But this is pretty standard what we're talking about. Okay, usually next comes a section called the literature search strategy, or sometimes it's called methods of searching. But the idea here is that you're going to describe your process for locating relevant material for your lit review. And the idea here is to convince your reader or your professors reading it that you've conducted a comprehensive search, right? But you can't just say, hey, I conducted a comprehensive search and leave it at that. Right, you have to show them, right? You have to describe the steps that you took. You have to talk about the databases that you referenced, the search tools you used, the search terms you used, right? So show them that you can say that you conducted a comprehensive search using whatever library you use, your university library, that you probably access through the online portal, but then describe it. Right. And that includes, listed databases that you searched. There's in these academic libraries, there's quite a few databases. Academic Search Complete is one of them. That's one that searches multiple databases, right? Like hundreds of databases. It's like a Google Scholar kind of a thing, which is a search tool, which, as we know, it searches a lot of databases, right? It's not just a single database. So any databases that you search, you want to list those, and any search tools like Google Scholar, for example, something that searches multiple databases. If you searched any specialized journals, sometimes your chair will say, hey, I want you to make sure you look at this journal because it's one of the preeminent journals in the field. You can include that if you searched any specialized journals. You also want to talk about the search terms that you used. These are key terms that you would use to search for information, relevant information. And these are not going to be surprises or anything, right? These are your search terms should correspond to your variables, your major concepts, your theory, right? So if you're studying transformational leadership and emotional intelligence in, let's say, I don't know, middle managers or something, that, those would be some of your search terms right there, middle management, the theories, whatever variables that are connected to those constructs. And the last one too is important. Include any way that you qualified or filtered your search. Sometimes people will, you can click boxes, right, when you're in the search function in the academic library. If you want your search to return only text and only English, you can click that box. Only full text articles, you can click that. But the next two are important: data publication and peer-reviewed articles. The gold standard for what you want to include in the lit review are peer-reviewed articles, right? And peer-reviewed means that the articles have been sent to blind reviewers who are experts in the field, and they've given comments on it. And it's basically the article has gone through these reviewers who act like judges in a sense, to ensure quality of the work. So the material you review in the lit review must be peer reviewed. I mean, unless you're using statistics, you're going to refer to some statistics or something, like maybe from a state or a government website. I mean, that's okay. The actual material that you're going to be analyzing and discussing and reviewing should be peer reviewed. So you want to make sure in this literature search strategy description that you include some kind of language that you gave preference to peer-reviewed studies, and that you modified your search in that fashion. Data publication is also important because some schools require really recent research in the lit review. And this is going to be a good place for you to check your template, because some schools don't have any requirements. Some schools do. Some schools have really strict requirements. Like, I know some schools want all the material in the lit review, or most of it, to be recently published within the last 5 years. So that kind of really reduces, there's a lot of stuff. In a way that helps you out, that you don't have to include all the stuff before that. So if that's the case, you want to make sure also that in your description of your search that you gave preference to material that was published within whatever time frame your school wants to be published in. So those are two important ways to kind of filter your search, and make sure that you highlight that in the description. And this section really isn't that long either, maybe a couple pages, maybe a page and a half page, just as long as you get that information down, that pertinent information about how you searched for relevant research. Okay, again, another place to double check your template, the theoretical framework. Some schools only have it in chapter 1. Some schools only have it in chapter 2. Some schools, I think most of the time it's the case where they have it in 1 and 2. In the chapter 1, you mention it and you describe it briefly. And then in chapter 2, you have a more in-depth treatment of the theoretical framework. Right, so this is an extended discussion of the framework that may appear in chapter 1. Okay, in a lot of ways it's similar. You're just going to elaborate a little more than what's in chapter 1. Like talk about who developed the theory that you're going to be using. Obviously have citations with the year. Talk a little bit about what they developed the theory for. I mean, theories are developed to explain things. So talk a little bit about why the theory was developed, what it helps to explain. You want to define the theory, right? Just say what it is, what it does, along with any associated components of the theory. I mean, usually they have premises or tenets or components. And if you're using any of those for your study or studying those, you want to include those components of the theory and explain those. Discuss a little bit what researchers have used the theory for, right? The person developed for something, but sometimes theories get pulled into other disciplines or pulled from other disciplines. Let's talk a little bit about what other researchers have used the theory for. And then it's important to connect it to your study. How is it going to help explain, or how is it going to help guide what you're doing? Okay. We should probably talk a little bit here too about something called the conceptual framework and the difference between the theoretical framework and the conceptual framework. Because sometimes you may see on a template, or you may have heard your chair, or may have heard the term conceptual framework. All right, conceptual framework, theoretical framework. What's the difference? Which one should you use? All right, so I just take a real kind of practical approach to it. There is research out there if you want, further research on, to understand it better. But generally speaking, theoretical frameworks are typically associated with quantitative studies, and conceptual frameworks are typically associated with qualitative studies. And there's a reason for that, and it has to do with quantitative studies usually work deductively, right? So that means you're taking a theory, a general theory, that's going to help explain and contain your variables, and you're going to test it on a specific or examine it with a specific group or population, right? And then you're going to see at the end whether that theory that applied to whatever group or setting you applied it to, right? So you're going to move from the general to the specific. Qualitative studies, on the other hand, ones involving interviews and getting people's perceptions and their experiences and this kind of in-depth information, they typically work inductively. That means they're going, you're going to get participants, views and their thoughts and their perspectives. And their information about their experiences, and you're going to then kind of extrapolate or make general conclusions based on those specifics. So you want the kind of the data to speak for itself in a way. You want their experiences to kind of speak for themselves, and you want to draw conclusions from those experiences. So you don't need a theory, right? You don't want to overlay a theory on top of that. Right. So that's why they call it a conceptual framework. You're using concepts instead of theories. Using theories for the theoretical framework, you're using concepts for the conceptual framework. Again, you don't want those overarching theories that would kind of already tell you what to think if you're doing a qualitative study. Right. So you use you use major concepts associated with your study and definitions of those concepts pulled from the research. But as far as setting up, if you're doing a conceptual framework, as far as setting up the section, it corresponds pretty much to what we have here on the screen for theoretical framework. So again, instead of theories, using concepts. Great. Yep. And we have a blog on that. Yes, thank you. That just appeared in the chat window. Okay, and just one more thing about the theoretical framework. If you're conducting a quantitative study, and you're developing a theoretical framework, remember that your instrument plays the instrument, or the survey instrument that you're using, plays a big part here. So let's say you're studying emotional intelligence. Okay, well, there's several instruments for studying emotional intelligence, right? You choose the one that is designed to get the information that you need. All right, so you choose, let's just say, Goldman's survey. Well, Goldman has his surveys are developed from theories, right? So Goldman has his theory of emotional intelligence that his survey is based on. So if you use Goldman's survey, you want to use Goldman's version of emotional intelligence for your theoretical framework, right? So you wouldn't use Goldman's survey and then use somebody else's theory. because there are going to be differences, right? I mean, you think that, oh, the theory is the theory. Well, people have different kind of spins on the theory. Their surveys have different, they might measure slightly different things. They may have different components. So whoever developed your survey, you want to use that person or those researchers, whatever theory is connected to that survey. Make sense? So in other words, don't use one person's survey and then another person's theory. Okay. Okay, review of the literature section. I mean, this is really the meat of the chapter. I mean, this is probably 80% of the chapter right here. And this is all going to be based on the specifics of your study, right? So if you're conducting that study on emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, you are going to be covering, research on those two constructs, and whatever kind of ideas come out of from the literature, right? So it's important to organize this section well. You don't just want to have a big lump of information because it's not going to be writer friendly. It's not going to be easy for you, right? You want to section things out, and it's not going to be reader friendly either, right? Because who wants to read just a lump of information with, no organization or no section headers or no places to stop, right? So you want to cover the recent literature on your factors, your variables, your major concepts, the things you're studying, right? Because the lit review is not it's not a general take on your topic, right? It's specifically targeted to, your variables, the things you're looking at. So those things are going to constitute the sections, right? So you're going to have a section on research on transformational leadership. You're going to have a section on the research on emotional intelligence. And you may even have subsections within those sections based on what's in the literature, right? If the literature is showing that there's a certain themes or certain points that keep coming up, you may want to use those ideas as subsections within those larger sections. Okay. So, I mean, think about your organizational strategy for this section. Right, use headers to organize material into sections based on what you're studying. Organize material in sections, typically by having a section introduction and then reviewing the research. Right, so when you start a section on emotional intelligence, define emotional intelligence right there at the beginning. Have an introductory paragraph, right, and then you're going to go in and discuss the research on emotional intelligence. Okay, and when we're reviewing the material, I mean, what does it mean to review the material? Reviewing the material consists of synthesis. That means bringing different parts together to create a whole, and analysis, right? So you're going to not just be reviewing it, but you're going to be making comments. You're going to be looking for weaknesses, for gaps. You're going to be looking for places where the literature connects to what you're doing. Right. So here's synthesis, right? So you don't want to kind of go one study after another, right? Here's what this person did in their study. Well, here's what the second person did. Here's what the third person did. That's called an annotated bibliography. And that's not really what they're looking for. They're looking for more of a synthesis, right? So you're going to make a point about emotional intelligence from the literature, and you're going to bring different ideas together, or ideas together from different studies to make this point. So, right, combine information from studies to make your point, synthesize at the paragraph level, and use standard paragraph organization strategy. And I say this because, again, from top to bottom, the challenge of this chapter is organization. And if we kind of go back to what we learned in middle school or wherever we learned it about paragraphing, it's going to help you. I know it sounds, well, what are we talking? Why do we got to go back that far? Believe me, when you get kind of awash in all this research, having good structure and good paragraph, it starts at paragraph structure, is going to help you, right? So just to recap, it's, having a topic sentence, you have evidence that supports or something in material that illustrates the topic sentence. And then you have a summary sentence or a sentence that leads into the next paragraph. And the evidence, if you have a topic sentence, you're making a point, the evidence for the lit review is going to be material from the studies, right? Details from the studies that are going to help you make your point. And this could include, the details from the studies could include, what type of study it was, what the findings were, right? Who the participants were. Now, does this study confirm, or is it at odds with what somebody else studied? So you want to kind of put these details into conversation with one another. And note where findings differ or align with one another. Also, it's also helpful when you can to bring it to the reader's attention where there's weaknesses, right? And we'll get to, let's get to the next, because we'll go to analysis. I'll come back to synthesis in a minute. But you also want to, where you can, you want to provide analysis of the studies too. So in other words, where are some of the weaknesses? What are some of the shortcomings? Where are the gaps? And where there are gaps, or where something, a study falls short, they focus on something, but it wasn't really what you're doing. You want to highlight that, right? You want to highlight the gaps or the shortcomings in the studies, or what they didn't focus on. And hence that helps to make the argument for your study. So wherever you can do that, again, remember the lit review culminates into a large argument for your research problem, for why your study is needed. So anywhere that you can kind of draw out a shortcoming or a gap in the research and point to the need for your own study, that's helpful. Okay, so synthesis and analysis. And I'm just going to give you an example of synthesis here. At the paragraph level, just to show you what I'm kind of talking about the topic sentence, and then using details from studies to help make your points. So I'm not going to read it all, but just to show you that the topic sentence is obviously highlighted in yellow there. The green material from the top green mark to the bottom green highlight is all the evidence. And the teal is the summary sentence. So I'll read a little bit of it to you just to make a few points. So if you notice at the topic sentence, recent research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. Okay, and then the green material are details from the studies from different studies that help support that topic sentence. Now, there's a little bit of an analysis in here. And if you notice in that first sentence, it says recent research has mostly shown, right? So not all of it, because when we get down to, well, let's say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences from the bottom, it says, unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al., Phillips et al. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetes knowledge and glycemic control. Okay, so there's the one that didn't support the thesis, right? So we said mostly, that's the one that was off. And there's a little analysis here where it says, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. Okay, that's a little bit of analysis thrown in there. There were some weaknesses of the study that may have contributed to why it doesn't support what the other ones support. And then in the wrap-up sentence, empirical evidence from recent research largely supports, again, there's that modifying word, right? Most of it does, not all of it. So that's kind of, that's an example of synthesis, making point, bringing material from studies, different studies together to help make that point. A little bit of analysis thrown in there on one of the weaknesses of the study to help explain why it didn't show what the other ones found. Okay, and that's what I'm talking about too, is organization at the paragraph level. Okay. All right, we talked about analysis, and I think, yeah, we're at the summary. Like any summary, recap major points from the chapter. And in this case, it's going to mean recapping, the major points from the literature, right? Some of the, the major issues or points that or trends even that the research showed. It's always a good idea too in the summary of the lit review is to remind the reader of the research problem based on what is in the literature and what's not, right? You just reviewed the literature. Here's all the stuff that the literature shows, but it's still nobody's addressed what I'm planning to address. Okay, and reiterate the need for your study. Again, the major section is going to be that review of the literature, which is going to be based on what's in your study specifically, like what you're studying specifically, right? So there's no, other than keeping the information organized and organizing it by your variables, by the things you're studying, they're all going to be different. And another piece of advice is to use your resources, and I have a couple other resources here in a minute I'm going to show you. Just get a hold of an approved dissertation from your school that's close to yours, and just look at it to see how people have handled it. And here are these are some helpful tools that we found. One is called Research Rabbit, and there's the website, and another one is called Connected Papers. And what these are, they're web-based platforms, and they help you with the research problem. The research process. They help you streamline it. I'm not going to give you a tutorial because it would be pale in comparison to the ones that they actually have on the websites. So they have tutorials that will help you and that will show you exactly what they do. But what it does, they're kind of, they act as conceptual maps, right? You can look up a paper, right? And then it will show you other papers that are like that you can look at, right? And then it will kind of give you a graphic representation of how they're related. Well, this paper isn't so closely related to this one, but it's very closely related to this other one. So it gives you like a conceptual map. And it helps with one of the biggest challenges, which, like I said, is not just organization, but it's sorting through and finding this relevant information for your study. So I would advise you, to look at these to see if, they might be helpful to you. Okay. All right. And again, this is who we are. Again, full service dissertation consulting company. Offering support with all chapters, statistics, qualitative methods, defense proposal and final defense PowerPoints. And here's our contact information. So again, go to our website, see what we offer. We have the webinars are archived. We have resources. We have resources on chapters. We have resources on all kinds of statistical analyses. Go to our website, look around. Also, click that link to schedule a consult. It's free, and just to see if what we offer would be helpful to you, and you'll be able to talk to somebody, that will give you a lot more information than I'm able to in this webinar about what we do. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to questions. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Oh, you're welcome. Any questions? You can just type them right in the question and answer box. No questions? Okay, let's see. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, no questions? Okay, I have one here. When you spoke about analysis, you mentioned we should reiterate. Analysis, yeah, when you're kind of analyzing some of these studies for their shortcomings or the weaknesses. It's, where you can reiterate what your study is doing is always a good thing. So in other words, these studies focused on one thing, but they didn't focus, there was a gap, or they didn't focus on what you're focusing on. So it's always helpful to reiterate, where there's a gap and that your study is designed to fill that gap. Okay, let's see. Analysis slide again, sure. That's the synthesis, that's the analysis slide. Okay. Okay, let me see here. I'll get to each as they come in. Do you have any do's or don'ts and what should be in your background section versus your literature review? Yeah, the background section in chapter 1, I think the literature review is, the background basically catches the reader up on kind of what's gone before about whatever the problem is and some of the research on the problem, kind of the major trends. It's got a historical focus. The lit review is longer, bigger. It's more focused on the recent literature. It doesn't, and it's not necessarily chronological. The lit review is usually focused topically, right, based on your variables. And the background section, it's a little different. You don't have as much detail in the background section also about the studies. It's kind of and I don't mean story in a fictional sense, but I mean it's kind of a story of where the problem has been and what the literature has said about it, in a kind of broad strokes kind of way, not in a really detailed level. And when you're writing at the lit review, I mean, you get into the details of these studies. Okay. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the systematic review? Systematic review, I'm not exactly sure what you mean about systematic review. If you could explain it, I'll answer this other question if you want to refine that a little bit. When is it best to start the literature review? During the conceptualization process or when you get to the chapter itself? That's a great question. Now, don't confuse the lit review with just doing research, right? I mean, during the conceptualization process, when you're thinking about things, how things fit together, what you're thinking about doing, you're going to be doing research. So you could be doing kind of the groundwork for the lit review at that stage. I mean, you're not writing the lit review per se yet, but you're still engaged in research. You want to keep track at that point of the conceptualization of the research you get, right? If you found an article that you like, I mean, pull it or get the or start a list, like a reference list, right? So you don't go, oh God, that was a good article. Why didn't I, get that? Or why didn't I remember what it was? So yeah, you want to start a reference list, and that reference list can become the beginning of your lit review, right? So I would say, even though you're not starting the lit review that early, you may be setting some of the groundwork for the research. So I know that doesn't answer your question verbatim, but you wouldn't probably start writing the lit review until later, but you could do some of that guided research that would help you with the lit review early on. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you everybody for coming. All right, you're welcome. All right, take care everybody. Remember, we offer other webinars, so check our website to see what we're offering and when. All right, thank you very much.